My name is Craig, and today we're going to be covering off enclosed spaces, focusing particularly on tunnel ventilation. What are some of the common challenges in a tunnel environment that could impact your health negatively? How do we effectively understand the tunnel and put a strategy in place that's suited to that tunnel? How do we know once we've got a ventilation solution in there that it's actually working effectively? How can we have the absolute assurance that your health is being protected? These are some of the questions that we'll be covering off and discussing as we go through the session. Why do we need ventilation when we're working in a tunnel environment? As you will understand and as you can appreciate, tunnels can be a very, very high risk environment, particularly if there's not adequate ventilation. And as you are aware, the effect of poor air quality varies substantially. It can really, really differ depending on the amount of time that you spend within the tunnel, the type of contaminant and the concentration of the contaminants that are found within the tunnel environment. Now, as the slide states, there are some considerable health impacts that can affect you if the environment isn't effectively maintained. So we could be starting off with fairly low level of exposure, so you're not in the tunnel for a majorly long period of time. But even just low levels of oxygen or the presence of harmful fumes in the air can have effects to your immediate and long-term health. Some of the standard health complaints can be anything from dizziness, fatigue, feeling nauseous, and all the way through to lung and heart disease, and even if it's too extreme, can also be fatal. So that's why it's really, really important to make sure the environment that you're working in is effectively controlled, the air quality maintained. What do we actually class as a tunnel? Now, as you can see on the slide there, we've put a number of different environments that a tunnel is classed as. So just to run them through with you briefly, the most common would be the railway tunnels, culverts, aqueducts, pipelines, ring mains, cable tunnels, underpasses, roadway tunnels and sewers. As you can see, that's a wide scope of industries and workers that are likely to come in contact with a tunnel environment, and no doubt there are many more, but these are some of the main and key environments that class as a tunnel and where the health hazards can typically be found. So, as you are aware, there are a variety of methods to ventilate a tunnel. However, if you're going to make sure that you're implementing the correct methodology, it's really, really important to firstly assess the environment, really understand the environment that you're entering into. From there, you'll then be able to establish which methodology will be most effective for the given application. So on the slide in front of you now, we've put some of the key factors or key questions that we are asking, or you need to ask when you're considering a tunnel. So looking at the size of the tunnel, looking at the physical details, the length of the tunnel, looking at where the works are taking place within the tunnel, the type of activities, the type of hazards that are likely to be found or created as a result of your work. Is the tunnel open both ends, or is it closed? Is it only open one end? What is the access like? How easily can you access the tunnel? Is there a natural airflow? Is there a prevailing wind flow through the tunnel? And what about shafts, vent shafts or chimneys? All these factors are really, really important. They can all impact and affect the effectiveness of a temporary ventilation solution. So, as you're aware, there was a number of different approaches to ventilating a tunnel, and we're going to spend a few minutes going over these in the next few slides. We're going to discover and consider the different ways that a tunnel can be safely maintained, effectively ventilated. Starting off, what we know as an open tunnel environment, and you can see the picture there showing an axial fan located within the tunnel. Now, a tunnel that is open at both ends is relatively straightforward to control. And there are several ways that this control measure can be implemented effectively. The most basic and quite common way of ventilating an open tunnel is to have a large axial fan sat within the tunnel, as the picture shows there on an RRV trailer, or some way of getting the fan into the tunnel environment. Now, the important thing that if you're going to try and ventilate a tunnel in this way is that the fan needs to be large enough and move enough air so that you're getting a fast flow of air through the tunnel rather than just recirculating the air within the tunnel environment. What you really want to be looking for when you're ventilating a tunnel is what's known as the Venturi effect, or an entrainment of air, which is where you're drawing in air from outside of the tunnel and through the length of the whole tunnel, maintaining a constant airspeed, a constant flow of air through the length of the tunnel. We have seen in the past some contractors, some clients try and ventilate a tunnel by using small little axial fans secured to the side of the tunnel, sometimes known as the daisy chain. Now, we feel it very, very important to point out this is not an effective way to ventilate a tunnel. You are not drawing in enough fresh air, and potentially what you're doing is just recirculating the fumes within the tunnel. You're not controlling that contaminants at all. So again, working with an open tunnel and using a centrifugal fan. So an often better and other way of ventilating this environment is to use a high-powered centrifugal fan that is sat outside the tunnel, as the photo shows there, with the fan outlet connected to a length of ducting. And the ducting is connected to the side of the tunnel, and the ducting in this, with this approach, only really needs to run 15 to 20 meters into the tunnel. One of the main benefits, one of the main features of this solution or this approach is that you're not needed to put equipment within the tunnel. As you can imagine, this therefore has a major benefit in terms of not restricting the movement of plant that's already within the tunnel environment. Another important point to consider is that a centrifugal fan is massively quieter than the large axial fans. Particularly important if you're working in a sensitive environment, a built-up environment, particularly if you're working overnight as well. Simply sitting a fan outside of the tunnel and just blowing air at the face of the tunnel is not a good way to ventilate. Effectively, what you're doing is just creating a massive turbulence around the tunnel mouth, and very, very noisy and inefficient way of ventilating a tunnel. You need to be maintaining the Venturi effect, the entrainment of air. Make sure you've got that jet of air traveling all the way through the tunnel, making sure there's no way that any contaminants can build up. Another example here is open tunnel venting up a shaft or a chimney. So if you have a chimney or ventilation shaft that is central within the tunnel, so halfway through the tunnel, you can create a Venturi effect up the shaft. So we're drawing in fresh air from either end of the tunnel, drawing it through to the fan that is centered or located centrally, and then venting the air up the shaft to outside. Particularly effective and useful if you have multiple teams working within the tunnel through the whole length of the tunnel, and what you don't want to be doing is blowing the contaminants or the foul air from one working team through the tunnel and impacting the next. So again, that really points out the importance of understanding the activities you've got within the tunnel to make sure that the ventilation solution that is put in is giving you the best level of control for that environment. Dead end tunnels and using centrifugal fans. Now, a dead end tunnel, so a tunnel that is closed at one end, is more of a challenge to effectively ventilate, as you need to get ideally need to get the air to the far end of the tunnel. As you can imagine, this often involves a lot of temporary ducting, so that needs to be taken into consideration with the design of the system. And really, it's the safest way to ventilate a dead end tunnel. So you want to sit a fan externally and force ventilate fresh air down the entire length of the tunnel through the flexible ducting to the absolute far end. That way then you're providing a fresh air supply to the furthest point of the tunnel at the dead end. That fresh air then purges all the way back through the length of the tunnel to outside. and that's therefore taking any contaminants with it. That also means those that are working right down the far end, so they're the furthest point away from safety, have the freshest air supply, so you're not compromising in terms of their safety in that way. Some clients will ask to try and extract out of an environment like that, and that's really something that we sort of advise against. It's not so easy to provide a whole level of control, and with trying to extract out of that environment, if there's no makeup air coming back in from the opposite end, you can often end up just recirculating the air within the tunnel rather than actually bringing in some fresh air, purging any contaminants back out to outside. Aqueducts and using centrifugal fans. So again, potentially not such a common application, but it's something we have a lot of experience in and we have done successfully. So aqueducts and other similar tunnels that have restricted openings at either end. So the tunnel may be accessed by a shaft or a hatch. And in this application, what we feel is the most beneficial way is to actually use the tunnel to act as a duct itself. The diagram at the bottom of the slide there, you see the fan with the ducting connecting into the tunnel. The ducting is sealed into the tunnel, which then forces the fresh air through the length of the tunnel, which then comes out at the opposite end of the tunnel via a shaft. Now, there are key things to make sure of when you're ventilating a tunnel in this environment is that there's sufficient air or sufficient space for the air to naturally escape at the opposite end. If it's too restricted, then you start getting back pressures on the fan. And as I alluded to earlier, to make sure that the duct is sealed into the tunnel to make sure that you're getting a full efficiency of the air all the way through that tunnel, purging back to outside. When we are considering a ventilation solution, particularly for the tunnel environment, what are we guided by? What do the guidelines say? So we work to the BS 6164, which is a code of practice which covers tunnel construction work, and it has recently been majorly, significantly updated, particularly with major changes to the expectations around ventilation and air quality control. I feel it's important to point out that most of what we've discussed today is around existing tunnels rather than new build, but we should still consider where and how this standard applies to existing tunnels. So there's a number of guidelines that have been brought in and updated, and we feel it's our duty to bring them before you. I'm not going to take up your time going into too much detail, but particularly important points to consider in terms of the type of equipment that have been taken in there, particularly with the introduction of these Euro engines nowadays, the diesel Euro engines. Important that depending on the size of the engine, really determines how much fresh air you need within the tunnel environment. How much is the tunnel going to be restricted by the plant in that tunnel? These are all calculations and all factors that you have to take into consideration, guided by these code of practice. That is really, really critical to make sure that you take into account when you are ventilating or designing a ventilation solution. And that's really where the RVT group gets involved. We're here to work with you as a consultant, partner with you, understand the work that you're carrying out, understand the contaminants that you're likely to come across or be faced with within the tunnel. And then we can work with you to put a tailored solution together, as we spoke about earlier, giving you that absolute assurance that the tunnel environment you're working in is safe. You're not going to be overexposed. You can have the absolute assurance that you can send your workforce in there to do a job, and they're not going to come out at the end of the day any worse off than when they entered.